we're trying to build a citizens movement here, and that really depends on local groups all taking ownership. And what we're seeing here, and you folks in this room, is what we're seeing across the country. We've seen since we started talking to folks almost a year ago, well before our official launch, which is that a lot of people are coming to the same conclusions on their own. We're at an extraordinary moment in our politics. It is a time of citizen movements. But this is a moment where obvious ideas are also rebellious ideas. That's probably what's brought you all here today. You understand in your gut that the only way we can solve problems in the United States is if we find a way to work together across party lines. It's not a radical idea. It's the idea our democracy was founded upon. And yet, there's a dynamic in our politics today which is focusing on driving people apart rather than bringing people together. It's a serious challenge. It's a real impact. The incentive structure in Washington is all backwards. Right now, in Washington, there are hundreds of groups focused on pushing the parties to their base, polarizing politics, to punishing elected representatives when they reach across the aisle to try to form a constructive solution. Add to that the rigged system of redistricting, closed partisan primaries. You've got a politics in America today that is what you, in many cases, fear it is. It's a politics which is polarized, which actually punishes people who try to solve problems across the aisle. And the whole idea behind no labels was to get Republicans, Democrats, and independents together, all based on a common understanding that our political beliefs and our partisanship are great. They're an important part of our personal biography, but they're not nearly important as the fact that we're all Americans first. And that if we can put the labels aside and start trying to work together to define that considerable common ground that exists in American politics on almost every issue you can think of. You define that common ground, then you can build on that common ground. And that's how you can move America, not left or right, but forward. As I said, it's in some ways, it's a blindingly obvious idea. But in today's politics, it is a rebellious idea because it is so completely countercyclical to what passes for conventional wisdom in Washington. And all of us have gotten involved. The founding leaders I'll show you in a second, the people who are on staff, not just Nancy, who is really the core co-founder along with Mark McKinnon, but the staff here today. Ethan, who does social media. Aaron, who does communications. We've got Margaret, who's the deputy director and does finance. We've got Kevin, who does field. You know, you'll notice this is an idea that particularly resonates with young Americans, who I think understand in a deeper way that a lot of the grudge matches that have dominated our politics are really losing their relevance. And when Mark McKinnon and myself and a full group of others got together, we were all united across party lines by this simple idea that hyperpartisanship is hurting our country because it's stopping us from solving the serious problems we face. And if we combat that hyperpartisanship, if we can offer political figures just a little degree of cover when they reach across the aisle, rather than right now when they reach across the aisle, they just end up getting attacked from both sides, you can begin to change that dynamic. If there are 1,001 special interest organizations in Washington devoted to polarizing the political process, there should be one that is devoted to trying to unite rather than divide. There should be one that tries to actually reinforce what the majority of the American people actually believe. Very core American idea, which is that there's more that unites us than divides us. You can go poll over poll and you'll see that that's the case over and over. Let's take a look at, we're going to go through a little slideshow for a second and give you some of the fundamentals. This is the problem, of course. We've got polarization. In fact, if you look at some of the polling we've done, you know, it's not a surprise to understand that a lot of Americans think that the country's headed in the wrong track. The economy's headed in the wrong track. You know what's amazing? More people believe that our politics are headed on the wrong track, that our politics are broken than even the economy. It's an extraordinary state. People have faith in their country. They're losing faith in their politics and their politicians because of polarization and hyperpartisanship. This is sort of the big wake-up call, which is that our politics are being disproportionately dominated by the far right and the far left. The rigged system of redistricting, closed partisan primaries, it all contributes to it. You know, if you only have to worry about winning a closed partisan primary with a 10% turnout, then 5.1% makes a majority. You're going to spend all your time catering to that 5.1%. And the traditional role of the political leader, which is to try to form new coalitions, goes out the window. You're not focused on winning a general election anymore. You're not in the coalition business, building business anymore. You're in the play-to-the-base business. And we've even seen a new dynamic, which is political figures just try to throw long balls. Be as extremist as you can, and you'll raise a lot of national activist cash. And we see that over and over increasingly in our politics today. A relatively small number of folks is disproportionately dominating our debate and our politics. We think it's time to try to unite the other 70% of Americans. It's not so different than the idea that Jon Stewart was making when he did his rally to restore sanity. There's a lot of us out there in America who are just as patriotic, we're not just as hardcore partisan. We have lives, we're busy, but we care deeply about our country. No labels is an effort to try to aggregate, try to build that unity so we can start weighing in debates in Washington for the first time. This is the dynamic we're seeing. It's called rhino hunting and dino hunting, or at least that's what I call it. Republicans in name only and Democrats in name only. You see, right now, if folks try to reach across the aisle, they become vulnerable in these primaries. You're seeing, Olympia Snowe is facing a tough primary challenge up in Maine this time around. And she could easily win re-election in a general election, but she's going to have a tough time in the primary from the right. And probably elected candidates have a tougher time winning in general. It's a self-defeating cycle. One of the things that no labels can do, and we're already seeing some support for it, is getting dedicated Democrats who say, you know what, my party's less important than rewarding this kind of principled behavior in Congress. So one of the things we're going to be doing in the coming year is going up and knocking on doors, bringing Democrats and independents as well as Republicans to try to support a candidate like Olympia Snowe. And I'll never forget, actually, one of the first things that really brought to crystallize the need for no labels for me was probably 18 months ago when I started to do the Wingnuts of the Week segment on CNN. There was a Lindsey Graham, conservative senator from South Carolina, where my folks live, had the temerity to co-author an op-ed with John Kerry on climate change. Just co-authored an op-ed. And he said, you know what, we disagree on a lot of things. We disagree on a lot of things on climate change. But there are a couple of things we can agree on. So instead of doing the old all-or-nothing game in Washington, we're going to put our necks out just a little bit and say, let's try to build legislation based on the common ground. Let's try to move the ball forward slightly on climate change. Because he co-authored an op-ed with John Kerry, when he went home to South Carolina for a town hall, he got screamed at, called a traitor in the Constitution. Now, I think folks may want to go back and brush up on their Constitution. But, I know James Madison was pretty darn concerned about the power of factions being inflamed and getting out of control. But it is a symptom of the times we're living. And it's something to be aware of. And again, No Labels is trying to express that need to be a counterweight to these forces of hyperpartisanship that are sucking up all the oxygen in our debates and dispiriting good citizens who wonder, there's got to be a better way, but I don't know where to start. It feels like everyone else is organized before not. That's what No Labels is part of the promise is. Incidentally, I want to say that the lights are going to go off in around 1 or 2 minutes, apparently. Everything is normal. I'm not trying to pump it. And they're going to turn back on, apparently automatically. So when they go off, no butt-flirting screams. Is that old British line? No, keep calm and carry on. That's what we're going to do. We're going to keep calm and carry on. Anyway, until that does happen, I'm going to keep you out. Hyperpartisanship described earlier. It's the old line. Be the change you want to see. Sometimes described to Gandhi, but be the change you want to see. If you are frustrated with our politics being hijacked, with the American people being polarized for profit, and that is what it is, political profit. It's, in the case of media companies, polarizing for profit. We know there's a better way. We know that this approach is not representative of the American people, our character, or what we actually believe. We want this to stop. We need to take a stand, and we need to take a stand now. So No Labels this is an example. You see Kevin up there with Lisa Borders, one of our founding co-founders, extraordinary woman from Atlanta, ran for mayor. This is a rally we had citizen leaders at the Capitol Hill just a few weeks ago. I'll never forget meeting some of these folks just like you. Didn't show up to a local chapter. They came nationally on their own dime, volunteering. One guy blew my mind. He's a retired 3-star Marine general. Now here's a guy with a sense of perspective about defending the Constitution, a deep sense of principle about this country. Recently retired, and he and his wife want to get involved in No Labels on a citizen leader level because they care so much. And they realize that the hyperpartisan partisanship has got to stop. That said to me volumes about the kind of commitment that's out there. And you know what folks say? You know, they think the majority of Americans who aren't hyperpartisan don't feel passionately about politics. They see, oh, it's an unprincipled position. They don't know what they really believe. And it's just not true. It's just not true. In fact, as I said in that video, I think it takes more courage to try to think independently. To try to be willing to figure out where you can build some bridges and common ground to move legislation forward. The citizen leaders I've met so far have inspired me, and the folks who show up on a rainy night in Mount Kisco, you're here for that same reason. A lot of people all across this country are coming to the same conclusions at the same time. But no labels can be as a way to all meet. We're living in a time of citizens movements. Whether it's Move On the left or Tea Party on the right, this is a time, there's a citizen movement for us as well, for the rest of us. That's the way we can make our presence felt. That's the way we can start influencing debates. That's the way we can really, because of the quality of some of our founding leaders, really take a direct line into the way capital is run in Washington. There are senators who are begging for something like this to exist. Just yesterday, we met with Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, and recently Senator Evan Bayh, who just left the Senate. And small group, and they were just talking about the need for something like no labels. Ron Wyden had a Republican and Democratic co-chair in each of the counties in Oregon. That's a no labels way of trying to run for re-election. It's not the conventional wisdom way to run politics, but it's the right way to do it. And he won. And, he just co-authored a tax bill with Dan Coates, newly elected senator from Indiana, actually took Evan Bayh's seat, a Republican. Dan Coates was getting hate mail that day, tons of hate mail, just for co-authoring a bipartisan piece of tax reform legislation, which would actually lower most taxes. But again, that is a firing offense right now in Washington. That's a problem. We need to push back. It's all about practical solutions to the real problem. And the idea that neither party has a monopoly on good ideas for good people. Neither party has a monopoly on virtue or vice. That's basic, that's fundamental. But the Kool-Aid they make you drink in Washington these days doesn't allow for that common sense thinking. It forces everyone into this sort of ideological straitjacket. Actually, we've got someone in the audience today, Debbie Hauser, who's leading No Labels for Women, one of our core coalition's citizen leader out of New Haven. One of the ways that she got involved when she ran for office in Connecticut, she got in a huge amount of trouble because she wanted just to express a degree of independence. She didn't realize that when you got involved in politics, that you were suspected to kind of surrender your personal beliefs to walk in lockstep with the party line. And then one of her colleagues in town got in huge trouble, a local elected, because he supported a Republican for another statewide office. This guy started getting hate mail, questioning his patriotism, his loyalty to party. I mean, that's a sickness, folks. That's got to be stopped. This is the other thing worth keeping in mind. This is a little secret to politics. Whenever you feel dispirited and you think things are more divided and polarized than ever before, the bad news is you're right. The good news is that there are actually more of us than there are them. There are actually far more Americans, the center-right, center-left, independents, than folks on the far left and the far right. There's a huge space. And what No Labels is trying to be is be the last big tent in American politics. At a time when parties seem to try to be kicking people out, they're doing their ideological purity purges, we're trying to welcome people in. We're trying to put out a welcome sign. And we're not trying to be a think tank, plenty of those. We realize we're not going to have the best ideas, and we're not going to try to recreate the wheel. What we're going to try to do is create a space where people can come together to reason together. Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or independent, whether you're liberal, conservative, or centrist, we're trying to create a space for people who want to have a constructive civic conversation and to represent that approach to politics. Because we know that's the way you're actually going to solve problems. And this is where it becomes a challenge to you. Not only being the change you want to see, but to really stand up and try to throw your shoulder to the wheel a little bit. And that's why just showing up tonight is a really important first step, saying there's got to be a better way if we're going to provide. We go next. Any issue that matters to this country is only going to be solved ultimately by figuring out how to get bipartisan support. Now, it's especially true now that we've got divided government, but in reality, it's true. And what we see in our politics is, I think, a cycle of kind of overreach and backlash. If one party gets into power, they think it's an ideological victory, they overreach, they get punished. And a lot of voters actually prefer divided government because they think it's going to put the brakes on things. It's going to force the parties to only act on the things which they can find agreement on. The problem is, right now our politics is so polarized, so angry, that it's actually difficult to take action, constructive action, even on urgent issues. Because everything is so hyper-partisan. Deficit and the debt problem, that, but really any issue, energy. I mean, this is an issue that should be pretty clearly nonpartisan. You've got your ideological absolutists, but the vast majority of American people realize, and every poll shows it, that we need to take some action to take coordinated action, long-term action, to wean ourselves off foreign sources of oil. But we've got a hard time passing legislation anymore, so it becomes piecemeal. So people play gotcha politics. Deficit and debt is one that's playing out right now. I mean, this should be a no-brainer. I mean, math isn't partisan. We got a problem with just basic deficit and debt. And it's an issue that we find unites people. And yet it's become partisan gamesmanship. People try to extend a hand and it gets slapped back. All or nothing ends up dominating the debate. And that's not the way you're going to solve this problem. I mean, the good news is we have divided government many times in the past, and a lot of good things have come out of it. National Highway Act, for example, came under Eisenhower's president, Democrats in control of Congress, Lyndon Johnson. Under Reagan had divided government most of the time he was in office. And he was able to accomplish many things. Clinton and Gingrich had terrible fights, but they were able to ultimately, turn the deficit into a surplus briefly. Managed to screw that one up, but that's a story for another day. But this is all happening in real time right now. I mean, we just had a fight that almost shut down the government that didn't really represent what it was about. I mean, the fact that it hinged on policy riders at the end of the day that were about Planned Parenthood had nothing to do with, fiscal issues. That shows how the extremes can hijack the debates. And now we're in a time in our politics where, the shutdown is going to be a card that gets played. And I don't want to say, it's one side's problem or the other. It's difficult to cobble together these bipartisan majorities, even to deal with urgent issues. But if they're slow-moving issues that are important, like the deficit and debt, they become exponentially more important. And that's where it's going to take a citizens group to actually try to convince the senators and congressmen that they need to put their partisan label aside to try to figure out what's the long-term interest of the nation. And there are going to be Democrats who need to be encouraged, and there are going to be Republicans who need to be encouraged. The president's going to need to be encouraged as well. Because we've got this debt ceiling vote coming up, and one of the founding leaders of No Labels, Dave Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, I'm sure you've seen him on TV talking about this. He speaks as eloquently as anyone. This government's going to run out of money May 16th unless we raise the debt limit. So the question is, what's a No Labels solution to that problem? Well, we need to raise the debt limit, but we need to have some conditions that can help start to deal with the long-term problem. All going to be happening again in real time, and that kind of division is going to highlight the need for No Labels. When are we starting? Well, we already did. Big time, right? It was big time. Go back there for a second. So this is the launch of Columbia University. We had 1,000 people from all 50 states show up on the power of an idea. That says something. Again, people will say that, only the partisans care about their politics. They only feel passionate about it. It's a principled position if you're a hardcore partisan. Here, 1,000 people from all 50 states traveled because they gave a day. Because they wanted something to be different. They wanted to be something better, and they believed in the power of this idea. You see on the next slide, some of the folks who showed up. Mike Cassett, former congressman and governor of Delaware. His close primary loss to Christine O'Donnell is a great example of why we need No Labels. And actually on that same day, Adrian Betty's defeated in Washington, D.C. mayor after the teachers union put $1 million to win a close partisan primary. That's another great example, same day. Mike Bloomberg, you all know, Charlie Crist, Dylan Radigan. Next one. Oh, that's Abel. Okay, I couldn't tell with Manchin or Joe Manchin, who's a West Virginia senator, who's a big No Labels supporter. Antoine Maldonado, former Republican lieutenant governor, helped push through a very innovative election reform piece in California, trying to basically create top 2 open primaries across the state. It was amazing, right? California state, the Republican and Democratic Party is deeply divided. They had a ballot measure to create open primaries, what's called top 2. passed in 50 out of 52 counties. And if you were to guess, knowing very little, as a fellow New Yorker, I can appreciate this, about California politics, if I told you that the only 2 counties that didn't vote for this reform were Orange County and San Francisco County, would you be surprised? That's what happened. I mean, there's an appetite, a common sense appetite for something like election reform. And the hyper-partisans want to deny it. They don't think people care, but we do. We understand that that's one of the real problems. It screws up the incentive structure that forces our politicians to the extremes. After the launch, we got a ton of press. My favorite press, I have to say, came from being criticized by Rush Limbaugh and Keith Olbermann in the same night. Now, that just to me means we're doing something right. I mean, you know, if you can get criticized by Rush and Keith Olbermann, I felt good about myself that day. And you know, Rush has kind of developed a thing about us, apparently. You know, I've always been kind of amused. Some people who use the word freedom a lot have a problem with free thinking. He actually thinks that, you know, consistent with the ditto head model, that you're either 100% with them or you're against them, right? You know, it's you're with them or against them. He even went so far, and this was a genuinely low blow, that of accusing Gerald Lofter of being a member of No Labels, the guy who shot Congressman Gabby Giffords. Gives you a sense of kind of the anger and the sickness of some of the folks who are so frightened by the idea of no labels that they would take that kind of a low blow. But reality check, that's what we're seeking. So, you know, I'm a big U2 fan. There's a good line in one of their lyrics that says, you know, choose your enemies carefully because they'll help define you. I'm comfortable with that. These are some of the folks who spoke, saw them before, but again, you'll see political diversity, ideological diversity, geographic diversity. A lot of good people, all coming to the same conclusions in their own ways on their own time. David Brooks, you should go in particular pull up his speech that he gave as kind of the opening keynote. It was brilliant. It built off a column that I recommend everybody called the National Greatness Agenda, that points out that our politics are polarized, but the American people are not, and we're going to have to find a way to call them the better angels of our nature to deal with the problems we face. Senator Joe Manchin doing a great job. Just go through somebody else. Joe Scarborough, someone who's been a real and a committed Florida conservative, but a guy who has stood up consistently to angry and intolerant voices from their own party, his own party. And that's part of what I think No Labels can do, is to try to say that, look, you know, you don't just defend people when they cross the boundaries just because they're, you know, from your team. You know, this idea, well, they may be crazy, but there are crazies, has got to stop. And it takes courage to stand up and condemn people who are in your party when they're playing to the worst instincts of the American electorate. Those are the kind of people we want to defend and elevate. And Joe Scarborough has shown that. Cory Booker, great mayor, and mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and the courage to stand up to the machine in his town. A corrupt former mayor, stand up for school choice, working across the aisle with Governor Chris Christie. That's the kind of constructive partnership you need in cities and states. Dave Berger's made a career out of working with folks on both sides of the aisle. And then, too, I think you also see, you know, you've got people who are very liberal and very conservative, but they've been able to find a home rallying under the banner of No Labels because they recognize that's the kind of change you need to see. You want to play Cory? Okay.
Hi, I'm Cory Booker, and I support No Labels because it is the truth of who we are. We weren't born Republicans or Democrats. We have nothing tattooed on ourselves. The reality is we share a common ideal in this nation. It's rooted in our very hallmark of our nation, this ideal of e pluribus unum. We are the United States of America, and I know as a fact that organizations like this are essential because there's no Republican or Democratic destiny. There is an American destiny, and we will only go as far as we're willing to take each other. And so I'm hoping that our discourse and believing that the way we shape our politics of the future will reflect the strongest ideals of our past.
David Brooks.
Hi, I'm David Brooks. I'm a columnist for the New York Times, and I cover politics, and I find a lot of decent people are stuck in a rotten system. And everybody gripes about it, everybody complains, but until today, nobody's really organized to fix it. So it is a good day, because we might be the beginning of something big to actually change the way our politics works. Thank you.
That was very helpful. Thank you. All right, let's try Johnny Mack.
Well, let me give you a test. First time there's a bipartisan agreement on an issue this year. If you can mobilize the great silent,
No Labels Army.
silent No Labels Army to say, okay, thanks a lot for doing this.
To have their back.
And to have their back. I think that would be very helpful. And that's why No Labels can really play a very important role.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Senator.
Here's just a look at some of the founding leaders. Again, you'll see Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, elected, former electeds. Got the former Comptroller General David Walker, Walt Salter, who's one of McCain's top aides, a longtime speechwriter, P.P. McLean, a longtime top Clinton advisor, Mark McKinnon, campaign manager for Bush and McCain, John Cowan, head of Third Way, David Frum, former speechwriter for President Bush, respected conservative thinker, Bill Galston, one of the top thinkers in the Clinton administration, Nancy, one of the, I think, employee number 3 of the Clinton campaign in 1992. Jonathan Miller, elected statewide elected office in Kentucky. A really extraordinary group of folks. And there's a small example of some of the founding leaders. So what's next is we're mobilizing a national movement, and you've heard me talk about this, but this is what's necessary. What John McCain was talking about in that interview is what's necessary. Senators are hoping that an organization can reward them for reaching across party lines, to encourage them to do the right thing. That's what they don't have right now. Instead, they have all the countervailing forces, punishing them when they do that, but no one's saying thank you, keep it up, follow through. We've talked about this. Go to the next one. This is just examples of what we're doing, but what organizing groups do. I mean, email blasts, phone campaigns, town halls. We have 80,000 people who've signed up so far nationwide. We had 20,000 people show up for a telephone town hall with Erskine Bowles to hear him, one of the leaders of the Bowles-Simpson Commission, the Bipartisan Deficit Commission, which was a courageous effort to get America to deal with this. He did a telephone town hall, 20,000 people showed up on behalf of No Labels. That's extraordinary. It shows the depth of commitment. We're going to be doing neighborhood canvassing, town hall, social media. Ethan's running social media for us, press tours. This is a full service citizens movement that we are trying to present, to do a full court press to change the culture in Washington. We're going to be organizing in every congressional district, more than 1,000 signers in each district, 50 state leaders. Recognize it's something that really resonates with young people in particular. We're going to have a national convention in June of 2012 and invite the Republican and Democrat nominee to speak. The point here is, and this is where you guys come in too, being a local leader is so important because ultimately we're not trying to run this out of the back shop in Washington, as great as Nancy and the team is. This is something that needs to be owned by individuals in every local community. And when we go talk to folks, especially in the early primary states, we see an immediate interest, a deep understanding in how you guys can help affect the debate, affect the outcomes of elections, before elections and after elections. So this is no one's ever done something like this, building a national organization in every district. We're going to be having this convention in June, as I told you about. We're already doing rapid response. Whether it's throwing a yellow flag when somebody says something extreme and plays to the worst instincts, and congratulating folks may have the courage to reach across the aisle. National Days of Action. We're going to be doing things like supporting Olympia Snow, getting Democrats and Independents as well as Republicans to knock on doors in their district, busing people up from around the country to help encourage that kind of behavior rather than having these folks get killed in these close partisan primaries. And we're going to be developing a congressional report card. One of the tough things is it's hard to tell who's, because everything is through the partisan prism, you can tell who votes for their party 100% of their time. But it's hard to say who's really one of the active voices who's encouraging bipartisanship, who's encouraging for working with people across the aisle. We're going to come up with a report card that actually helps define the folks who are putting actually the effort behind the rhetoric. And that'll help, we hope, be a new metric in determining kind of who's really being part of the solution and who's part of the problem. This is part of the Olympia Snow effort. Just a little more on the convention. We have a system in this country. We're going to have a huge amount of interest through the primaries, then we're going to have a bit of a gap before the conventions. And here's a time where the candidates are going to be, wherever they are on the Republican side, going to be pivoting to speak to a general election audience. And No Labels is one way for folks to really, for them to talk to us and us to talk to them. And to help realize that they can't just play to the base. 51% does not make an adequate majority to govern this country, that you need to reach out early on and have follow-through and accountability. And this is just, the time is now. Be the change you want to see, and don't wait another day. You know, the extremes and the hyper-partisans depend on a degree of civic inaction from the majority of Americans who aren't obsessed with politics, who don't drink the Kool-Aid every day. And we can change that calculus by showing them they're wrong. But we need to do it. We all need to individually do it. You know, someone in the audience who helped absolutely launch No Labels, one of your neighbors, Ted Berger, of American Towns. Somebody who really understands the power of building communities online and understands the opportunity that exists in this space and understands the futility of hyperpartisan politics. It's neighbor to neighbor, it's citizen to citizen. That's how we change the equation in Washington, and they'll change the culture of hyperpartisanship. And together we can move the country out left, not right, and forward. We can. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, I want to take some questions.